Good evening, everybody. This is Representative Dean Phillips, and I want to thank the thousands of you who have taken time out of your evenings to join our conversation tonight. I know these are terribly difficult times for everybody, and there's a lot to talk about. So if you have any questions for me, just press *3 anytime during this call. And if you're interested in signing up for updates about my work in Washington and here in Minnesota, press *6, and a member of my team will be happy to set you up. Again, that's *3 if you want to ask a question tonight, and *6 to sign up for updates about my work. For those of you that don't know me, I'm a lifelong Minnesotan. I grew up right here in the district, in the 3rd District. I'm a small business owner, father of 2 daughters, both in college, and now your representative in the U.S. House for the past 14 months. And like many of you, I've been working hard from home these days. Here in Minnesota and back in Washington twice since the beginning of the crisis. My days are long, spending them on video and teleconference calls from sun up to sundown every day with my Republican and Democratic colleagues as we design and debate new legislation with our mayors, our police chiefs, our fire chiefs, our school superintendents, business owners, faith communities, conversations, of course, with our governor and his team with the state. Doctors and health system administrators, and hundreds of constituents, perhaps even some of you on the line tonight. And while none of us are as visible as, of course, we would like to be, rest assured we are getting a lot of work done using new ways of communicating and collaborating. So far in my first term in Congress, I have introduced 15 bills and have co-sponsored more than 380 bills. Each one, I believe, will make life better for the Minnesota families, workers, and businesses that I represent. And like many of you, I'm disgusted by partisanship, both in Washington, around the country, and even here in our state. And I decided to run for office to inspire more collaboration and cooperation, and perhaps most importantly, better outcomes. Government does not work as well for as many people as it needs to, and that is my mission. And that's why my favorite part of every week since I've been in Congress is the time that I spend with my 25 Democratic and 25 Republican partners on the Problem Solvers Caucus. And I'm proud of the fact that among the 232 Democrats in the House of Representatives, I've co-sponsored the 5th most number of bills introduced by my Republican colleagues. I've always believed that Republicans and Democrats should return to placing people over partisanship. And that's exactly true, especially right now during these extraordinarily difficult times for all of us and our country. As you know, the COVID-19 pandemic has brought unimaginable hardship right to our front doors. But I'm on a mission to help get us through it as healthy, as economically sound, and prepared for the future as humanly possible. So to that end, I've already introduced 3 bills just over the past month or so that deal with the coronavirus pandemic. One would create an oversight panel for the coronavirus relief money, which did actually become part of the law in the CARES Act. And as many of you who are following the money that's flowing out of Washington right now, we need oversight, transparency, accountability, and controls so that we can assure that the money is going to the right places and used for the right purposes, because it is all of your money. Another of my bills would help new businesses weather the storm and also provide capital to small businesses and startups here in the heartland of the country that often doesn't have the same access to capital as businesses on the coasts do. And my 3rd bill will help ensure that our elections in November are safe, secure, and fair. I think we can all agree that November 3rd of this year is going to be an election like none that we can remember, and I want to ensure that we do not have a circumstance that happened in Wisconsin with long lines, people actually documented now having gotten sick, and as course of all you know, the weather in November here in Minnesota is not quite as nice as April, so we want to ensure that the election is safe for everybody. And these are unprecedented times, and it really does require thoughtful and cooperative action so that we can save lives and protect our healthcare workers and our first responders, and provide a lifeline to workers and small business owners and every American, frankly, who's hurting and in need of our help. So I'm looking forward to hearing your questions tonight, your ideas. and even your criticisms, because all of those will make me a better representative of you. And the only way we're going to get through this is together. So I don't care your politics or your perspectives. I want to hear, and I will act on it. I respect you, and I'm grateful to be in a position to serve. So once again, if you want to ask me a question during the call tonight, just press *3 on your phone. And if you want to sign up for our e-newsletter, press *6, and you can track what we're working on both here in Minnesota and in Washington. And if you're looking for any information tonight or at any time, you can visit our website at phillips.house.gov. Again, that's phillips.house.gov. And it's a great resource, especially with information about the pandemic and the work that we're doing in Congress. So my team and I are here for you. I'm honored, I'm humbled, and I'm grateful to be on the phone with you tonight and look forward to your questions. And with that, I'll turn it back to Steve and we can get going.
Everyone, as you know, that is our Congressman Dean Phillips, and we are taking questions two ways tonight. If you're listening on the phone, as he mentioned before, you can press *3 to ask a question. We can also, if you're following along online, you can submit a question in the dialog box below the interface. Congressman, we're going to start with Jace. He has an online question, and he would like to know what mechanism exists to provide oversight into the SBA loans. We have seen the administration ignore congressional requests before, so how do we do this? A company related to the administration received a fast-tracked and oversized loan. Congressman, can you expand on oversight over these loans that are happening from the SBA?
Yes, it's a great question, and perhaps, in my estimation, one of the most important ones that we have to be asking right now. As I just mentioned a few moments ago, I authored a bill before we voted on the first CARES Act with language that would set up a congressional committee, a panel, a bipartisan panel that would oversee the distribution of dollars that would be forthcoming. And as many of you know, we have now allocated upwards of $3 trillion. It is the biggest distribution of taxpayer money, not just in our country's history, but in human history. And I believe, and I feel strongly, like probably every one of you does, that the money should be transparent, where it goes to, who it goes to, how it's being used, and ensure there's no corruption attached to it. So my language made it into the bill. It would establish a committee of 5 members appointed both by Senator McConnell, the majority leader in the Senate, Chuck Schumer, the minority leader in the Senate, Kevin McCarthy, minority leader in the House, and Speaker Nancy Pelosi. That is still in formation. I will confess to you that I'm disappointed. I wish that had been set up and activated already. It needs to be. We also just created a second committee just last week in a vote in Washington, another bipartisan committee that will provide oversight and accountability. Because the fact of the matter is it's not happening right now. And the news reports that I'm seeing, like many of you, of businesses like the Los Angeles Lakers, for example, huge restaurant chains getting money that was really the spirit of our PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, was to support small businesses. And not just big small businesses, the smallest of small businesses. And as a small business owner myself, I understand the pain that they're going through. All of our small businesses are. So one of my focuses right now, back to the question, is oversight, and accountability. And I'm on the phone every day with our leadership in Washington, both Democrats and Republicans, to ensure that these committees get set up quickly and that every American knows where every single dollar went, and that we have mechanisms to hold those accountable if any of the money is misused. So a good question, and rest assured, it is one of my foremost priorities. And thank you.
Thank you, Jace, for your online question. Lori in Eden Prairie, we want to go to you live now. Lori, go ahead with your question for the Congressman.
Hello, my name is Lori, and thanks for inviting me to the call. And I have a question in regards to independent contractors and unemployment benefits here in Minnesota.
And Lori, can you share a little bit more?
Well, I'm an independent contractor, and I have been for a while. And due to the COVID virus, I was no longer. What I do is I'm a critical incident crisis response contractor. So I go into many businesses and in the area in Minnesota and help out those in need. And I haven't been able to work at all since March 10th. And I just haven't. I knew that there was something going on with independent contracting and unemployment insurance, but I haven't heard anything. I've gotten some responses from your office, which I'm grateful for, and I'm just kind of still sitting in limbo, kind of wondering. I'd rather
so
work,
sorry.
but it's okay. I'd rather work because I love the work, but it's just one of those things. So.
Okay, well, and my heart goes out to you. We in Congress have given great conversation and consideration to recognizing how many independent contractors and freelancers there are in our economy. And the most recent update, Lori, for you, literally as of Friday, Minnesota DEED has begun the process of making payments to people who are eligible for the PUA, which is the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program. I know Minnesota is actually one of the very first states to implement it because it was funded in the CARES Act. I know it's a complicated program. We did not have a lot of time. States didn't. The federal government didn't to set up new mechanisms. So I think because of some of the complexities, it's taken a little while to get off the ground. But my understanding is it is a priority now of DEED. It should be up and running very, very quickly. And I do believe my office and DEED should have some updates as soon as the coming days. So I hear you, and anybody who's on the line who is a freelancer or independent contractor, rest assured we have your back. And I'm sorry it has taken so long to get some of these programs up and running. And one of our jobs is to see what's working and what's not and hold every entity, agency, and executive accountable to ensure that you can access what you deserve. So rest assured we have your back, and it should be any day now.
Congressman, let's go out to Chaska now, where Joan has been waiting. Joan, you are live with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Good evening, Congressman. I'm so grateful for your service. I'm deeply concerned about the integrity of our upcoming election, and while I'm confident about our state's response, I'm deeply concerned about our national response. Can you please speak to what Congress is doing to assure our vote as a nation will be protected?
Yes, thank you, Joan. Thanks for your kind words, and I share your concern. No matter your politics, I think we'll all agree that every single eligible voter in America should be able to cast his or her ballot on November 3rd. It is not a priority, it's a mandate. We will have an election on November 3rd, and our responsibility in Congress is to ensure to the best of our abilities that it's safe, secure, and fair. The best way to do so in light of the pandemic, of course, is to expand to the best of our abilities everybody's option to send in a mail ballot. Some of you on the line might know that 5 states already in the country, in the West, all have moved to mail ballot only elections. And it's a combination of both conservative states and liberal states and purple states. Utah is an example, Colorado, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii. So in my estimation, those are best practices. They have learned how to do the process well, efficiently, most importantly, without any fraud. And those are the key benchmarks in my estimation. So I have authored a bill that would require that every state be provided resources and ensure that the states communicate with voters to understand how you can vote. Of course, there will likely be polling places open all around the country, but we want to ensure that everybody who wants to can access a mail ballot. We also know that our adversaries, including Russia and we believe China, Iran, perhaps North Korea, have been meddling in our elections now for more than one cycle. And in Congress, we are regularly apprised of some of the efforts to combat that meddling, but it's real. And to all of you who are on the line tonight, I do think this is an opportunity to remind you that we have to be aware and cognizant of the fact that on social media and online, there is a lot of disinformation. And the best way to combat it is to be skeptical and to look at a wide variety of news sources to ensure that the information that you're digesting and acting on is true. Because I can assure you that our adversaries recognize they cannot beat us with their militaries, but they believe they can beat us by trying to destroy our country from within because Americans' division. So that's also a threat, and we are working to ensure that information is legitimate, that the election is secure, and that's a responsibility of all of us. I think we all play a role in that. I'm working closely with Senator Klobuchar on that issue as well, and a number of Republicans and Democrats in Washington who are very like-minded. So it's on my mind, and I rest assured, Joan, it is a significant priority of mine to ensure we have a very fair and safe election.
Folks, that's Congressman Phillips. If you do have a question, you can simply press *3 on your phone. And also, Congressman Phillips really wants to make sure that you're updated on newsletters, too, if you would like additional information. So if you'd like to sign up for a newsletter, it's simple. All you have to do is press *6. Congressman, we're going to go to Greenwood, where Hal is waiting. Hal, go ahead. You are live with Congressman Phillips.
Yes, Congressman Phillips. My wife and I and many of our liberal friends have been discussing recently about really how the divisiveness that has been exaggerated, I think, by the Trump administration has really interfered in some of our relationships with our dear Republican friends. And that has resulted many times in either them refusing to talk to us about that, or, us agreeing to not talk politics or whatever. They don't seem to understand our true fear about this administration. And I know you cannot address our individual relationships like that, but I guess I'm looking for a little hope from you. And how are you getting along with some of the Republican congressmen, congresswomen, and working on things behind the scenes? Because it seems like certainly on TV, all we hear and see is that divisiveness.
Yeah. Well, Hal, thank you for the question. And yeah, as I referenced earlier in my opening remarks, it's one reason I decided to run for Congress. I have become so dismayed about the lack of thoughtfulness, of respect, of decency in our political discourse. And like many of you on the call, I grew up in Minnesota that taught me to be respectful and taught me to admire my president no matter whether he or she was a Democrat or Republican. Same with our senators and our members of Congress. And that is the Minnesota in which I grew up. And I want to bring us back to that time. And that's why the first caucus I joined was the Problem Solvers Caucus. I referenced that we are now 25 Democrats and 25 Republicans. One of the small silver linings of having to be working from our homes these days is I get to spend many hours on the week with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. That does not afford the same opportunity, believe it or not, when we're in Washington. And even right now, I'm working with Congressman Chip Roy from Texas on a bill, Republican, Brian Fitzpatrick, Republican from Pennsylvania, Van Taylor from Texas, Brian Stile from Wisconsin, a good friend, Anthony Gonzalez from Ohio, William Timmons from South Carolina. These are already becoming good friends of mine because we've taken the time to invest in our friendships. We build trust. And just because we don't see things all the same way, we recognize that we have to celebrate that. And if we can demonstrate to the rest of the country that bipartisanship is not dead, that is a service to the nation. And the sad truth is the media, no matter what you might be digesting, doesn't tell the good stories about Washington. What gets eyeballs and gets ad dollars to the media networks is division and discord, anger, and that's what attracts people. And the sad truth is the good stories are not told as much. I've been to the White House now on 2 occasions. I've sat in the White House Situation Room with President Trump, with Vice President Pence, members of the cabinet. And I can say that, I've as I was taught as a kid, I try not to judge people until I spend time with them. I've seen, as you can imagine, the good, the bad, and the ugly. But no matter what, I'm committed to be respectful and get to a point where we can share ideas, act on them, and actually show the country we can do better. So I'm actually hopeful, and I'm more hopeful than ever, I must say, because this crisis has brought a lot of us together. We recognize that there is something far more important than petty politics, that our nation's future is at stake, and history will judge us, not by how many political insults we throw, but how well we navigate through these very difficult days. In our freshman class, I want to say this too, 92 new members of Congress, Democrats and Republicans from all around the country. We're unique. We're bringing a new ethos to Congress, and we recognize that if we don't fix the process, nothing else matters. And we're working together actually remarkably well. We also recognize that we're now in an institution that's designed to make change very difficult, and is also designed to separate people. The first week when we were in Washington as new members, we checked into our hotel as freshmen, and instead of getting together and having a dinner, getting to know each other, sharing our life stories, we're put on separate buses going to separate events, and that division between Democrats and Republicans began right away. And I'm one who believes that's a mistake on both sides. I think Democratic leadership and Republican leadership should commit to building relationships and building trust, because what we see right now in Washington, the reason things take so long to get done, the reason you see insults, the reason that there's so much division, is actually a handful of people in leadership positions that don't trust one another. And I talk with my Republican colleagues all the time, I should say, all the time, Hal, about one day, hopefully in the very near future, when we might be in positions of leadership, and we'll make our mission doing better by the country and entirely change the course of political discourse. And I also, let me close by saying this to all of you. It's an invitation. I respect that we all see things differently. I respect that we come from different life circumstances and have different life stories and see things perhaps through different political lenses. And that's a good thing. Thank goodness we live in a country where we can do that, where differences like that can be celebrated, can be debated, deliberated, and ultimately we come together. I believe it's up to us, not just in Congress, but every single one of you on the phone, every Minnesotan, and everyone around the country. And that is my hope and really my mission moving forward, that we bring people together and recognize good ideas can come from both sides. And I think the best is yet to come. That's my hope and my expectation and my mandate.
Congressman, we're going to go to Iria. Iria, I hope I have your name right. Go ahead. You are live with the Congressman.
Yes, thank you for taking my call, Congressman. Thank you for the work you do.
Thank you.
My question has to do with the current situation with regards to testing, as far as testing is concerned for this COVID virus. My wife was contacted with COVID virus, and we are dealing with it at home. But I did call, the disease control center to let them know that I'm dealing with this issue and that I would need to be tested. But I was told that I didn't need to have any tests done because I'm not showing any symptoms. To me, I think this is very wrong. When do you think this testing will be available to everyone who wants to be tested?
Mm-hmm. Well, Iria, thank you for your question, and most importantly, I wish your wife health. I'm sorry to hear that she contracted COVID-19, and I hope she's doing well, and hope you stay well also. Your question perhaps is the most important one right now about testing. We unfortunately as a country simply were not prepared. Our testing protocols did not work in the beginning, and we're playing catch up. And all of you on the phone, just like me, want to see our economy opened up as soon as possible and want to ensure that everybody is as safe as possible. And we can't accomplish that if we do not have mass testing that is reliable and fast. Many of you on the phone tonight might know that South Korea, for example, and the United States both reported our first cases of the coronavirus around the same time. You turn up the clock now to today. South Korea has 244 deaths due to COVID-19, and the United States is now over 50,000 deaths. And it's because primarily of one reason. We do not have testing in place yet. I was on the phone today with Governor Walz, and Minnesota is the best in the nation right now in preparing for testing protocols. The Mayo Clinic and University of Minnesota, as many of you know, have cooperated. And we're ready to roll out what I think is going to be literally the best practice in the entire country, if not the world. But we've got a major problem right now. The swabs and the vials necessary to do the testing we cannot obtain right now. And the federal government, unfortunately, keeps promising testing, and providing important equipment and materials, and simply is not delivering. So I want my answer, Iria, to to be more optimistic, but the fact of the matter right now is we are very frustrated. Every one of us who are trying so hard to ensure testing is made widely available, that it hasn't happened yet. I believe it to be a stain on our country, and we have got to be better prepared, not if this happens again, but when it happens again, and I hope it's not in the near future. But my hope is over the coming weeks, beginning very, very soon, we will start this testing enhancement. It'll be done broadly so businesses can start opening up again. We can identify who has had it, who has it, and then segregate people so we can prevent transmission and protect everybody. So I wish I had an answer for you. We're on the phone all the time with the governor, and I'm pushing the administration in Washington to fulfill their promise to help us obtain the material necessary. And that's where we're at right now. And we'll keep everybody posted, but I think we're still a little bit ways away from having the testing we need.
Kat out in Maple Grove, we're going to come to you next, but before we do, everybody, we want to hear from you. We really do. So we're going to ask a couple quick poll questions over the course of the remainder of the call. And to participate on the phone, you can simply vote by pressing the corresponding number on your keypad. If you're online, you can vote by selecting a response below the streaming player. Here's what we'd like to know. How would you rate Congress's response to this pandemic? Press 1 for poor. Press 2 for fair, press 3 for good, and 4 for excellent. So again, we'd like to hear your feedback. How would you rate Congress's response to this pandemic? 1 for poor, 2 for fair, 3 for good, and 4 for excellent. All right, Kat in Maple Grove, you are live with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello, Congressman.
Hi,
My
Kat.
question is about the stimulus package and all the bad press that we've heard about money going to places that really had nothing to do with the coronavirus. And I'm wondering, number one, if it's true. Number two, if it's true, how much money was sent to places that, maybe shouldn't have gotten it. And anyway, so what is your comments?
Well, Kat, first of all, thank you for the question. And there's first of all, no legislation that comes from Washington is ever perfect. There's no question. And I understand when people wonder, why did $25 million go to the Kennedy Center and there were some other allocations? And the answer is, in fact, some of you may have seen President Trump in his press conference when he was challenged on that, said that he supported the money going to the Kennedy Center. I think he recognizes also that there are some obligations of the federal government to support the institutions that are federally financed in Washington, the Smithsonian, public broadcasting, and the like. Those are federal funded agencies, if you will. Look, at the end of the day, I understand why people might question that, but I have to also point out the fact that I think the bill passed the Senate 96-0. It passed overwhelmingly in the House. And at the end of the day, members of Congress, both in the Senate and the House, agreed that for the most part, the bill included what we believe to be funding for the important needs of the country. That said, one of the reasons that I'm so focused on ensuring that we have our oversight committees and commissions set up is to make sure that the money that was allocated everywhere is being spent the way it is supposed to be, whether it's to small businesses, whether it's to hospitals, whether it's for our testing program, or whether it's even to the Kennedy Center. So rest assured, I understand why people are wondering about that. And at the end of the day, some of these things are done not necessarily with members of Congress involved. It's negotiations between the White House and leaders both in the House and Senate. And at the end of the day, we're presented a bill, in this case, a $2 trillion bill, and not afforded much time to negotiate it or to amend it or to even challenge it. Considering how important that money was to get out, most of us thought it was appropriate to vote yes, which most of us did, Democrats and Republicans. And now it's time for the oversight committees to get to work. And I would pay attention to that because they will be looking at every dollar, where it was used, how it was used, and ensure that taxpayers received some good value for it. And I respect your question, and rest assured I'll keep my eyes on it.
Anthony in Coon Rapids, you are now live with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Good evening, Representative Ms. Phillips. I had a question regarding the actual stimulus packages, the various ones going through. I'm very concerned that since we're in such a large amount of trillions and trillions of dollars of debt as a country, just wondering how is that going to be paid for? And secondly, I was wondering, in regards to the swine flu in 2009, there was over 200,000 deaths in that. In the future, are we going to be looking at similar responses to outbreaks such as this that we're doing right now in regards to our country and shutting things down?
Okay, so your first question about where's the money coming from is a really important one. Many of you probably know that even before this crisis, we had a federal debt of about $23.5 trillion. We spend right now over $400 billion annually on our debt service, which is the interest that we pay on that debt, and it's unsustainable. And I remember being a little boy growing up here and hearing my parents talk about it. I had seen news reports about how the federal government was kicking the can down the road to the next generation. And I was a little boy that thought, oh, by the time I'm older, it'll be taken care of. And lo and behold, we are facing an extraordinary amount of debt that now exceeds our annual economy. So to answer your question, where's the money coming from, Anthony? The sad truth is that it's printing money right now. And the only good news is that our competitors around the world are in even worse conditions than the United States right now. And this is not the time to debate fiscal responsibility. That time was before this, which I've done quite regularly, and it will be after we emerge from this crisis. Because we do have to support American families and workers and small businesses and our health system to get us through this horrible crisis. But once we do, I was on a call today for an hour with Democrats and Republicans talking about what we must do from a budgeting perspective to ensure that we do not continue to kick this can down the road and burden future generations, because we may be approaching a $30 trillion debt. And every time we raise that debt and every time we have to spend more on our interest payments, that means we can spend less on the important programs that are important to many of you on the call tonight. And we are lucky right now that we live in one of the lowest interest rate environments of our lifetimes. But as you know, back in the 1980s, anybody who was around then, if we get an interest rate spike, we are in big trouble. So I am one of many on both sides of the aisle that are going to be focusing on this. And it's gonna require a lot of serious work and consideration of what kind of country we want to be, how we ensure we provide appropriate social safety nets, make sure that our tax dollars are used effectively and efficiently, and if programs don't work, they should either be changed, outsourced, or shut down. And we have to generate revenue to pay for the needs of our country, including infrastructure and so many other things. So I'm afraid that right now, we're just printing money, and it's something we have got to address when we emerge from this. As for future outbreaks, there have been outbreaks before, and as you all know, we've had pandemics in the past, not significant ones like this one during our lifetimes, but the United States, unfortunately, was not prepared this time. The last administration left a pandemic plan in place. The last administration had a pandemic response team in place as part of the National Security Agency. And unfortunately, that office was shut down in the last couple of years, and the plan in place to prepare for a pandemic simply appears to not have been used. And I don't care about your political perspectives. That's just a failure of the executive office in our country. And moving forward, I don't care who's in office. We have got to demand that the president and our administration that manages every single federal agency is well prepared. And as you look around the world and wonder why other countries are not even close to the death rates that we have, why other countries are in many cases open for business or never had to close, the answer is that they were better prepared. And I am frustrated, I'm disappointed, and I am very intentional about ensuring that we're going to do better next time. And that's going to take a comprehensive bipartisan effort to ensure we are. And that's where we're at. And I wish I had better news for you, but we have to learn from these grave mistakes and ensure that the greatest country on earth is better prepared as we should have been.
Congressman, we're going to go out to Chanhassen. Suzanne, you have a question for the Congressman. Go ahead. You're now live.
Wow, thank you. I have so many questions for you, Congressman. And the discussion has been quite interesting, and it takes my questions all over the place. My original question was about the post office. We are watching the president blackmail Congress just so he can bully Jeff Bezos. Well, if the post office fails, what's going to happen to voting by mail? How will that affect our elections? The post office is part of our Constitution. We do need to fund it. And it's a shame that they have been forced to self-fund their own retirement. Boy, do I have a lot more to say. It's been very, very interesting, but I'll stop there.
Okay, Suzanne, thank you. Thanks for the question, and you can always submit other ones to us offline and speak with my staff too. Any question that you might have, I'd be happy to answer. As for the post office, I believe it's an integral part of our country, both our history and our future. The reason the post office is in such a sorry state financially is that it was forced to pre-fund its retirement benefits to the tune of tens of billions of dollars in a way that no business, organization, or enterprise could do except if they were mandated by Congress to do so. Of course, this predates my service, but it placed an incredible burden on the Postal Service. And we have 33,000 post offices around the country, just under 800 here in Minnesota. People throughout the country, of course, rely on their post offices in both small towns and larger cities. To your point about mail balloting, I believe that's a perfect example of why we need the Postal Service. And rather than criticize or demean or threaten to put them out of business, as some in the White House have lately, I'm someone who likes to be innovative and think, what could the post office be? How could we reimagine the post office? Could they be small business administration extensions where small businesses could go to apply for funds for SBA loans? You know, how can we perhaps use post offices as voting places if we need to in an emergency like this? You know, how can we not just protect the extraordinary people that work for the Postal Service, but how can we make sure that that connection point, especially to rural America, where the post office is a gathering place, it fulfills a lot of service needs for a community, how do we preserve that? And the answer is we can. We have since the founding of the country. So I feel it's a responsibility of those of us in Congress to find a solution. The president has criticized how much the Postal Service is charging Amazon to deliver packages. Well, you know, I don't have insight as to exactly what they're charging, but I think a little bit of oversight and accountability will identify that. And frankly, if there was ever an example where the Postal Service was undercharging a large company to help them deliver packages, we should address it. But the real problem, again, is the tens of billions of dollars of pre-funding their retirement benefits. That's something we can and should address. And I think most of you would agree that we need a postal service in this country. It is something that way too many Americans rely on. And frankly, as you mentioned, there's a reference to it even in our Constitution. So that's my interest, and we're going to be working on that hopefully shortly. I want to see it preserved and protected and frankly reimagined, and that's what we'll be trying to do.
So for Suzanne and others, if you'd like to reach the office, you can do so at 952-656-5176 for any questions. You can also press *3 on your phone. We're going to get to as many questions as we can tonight. And also, a really great idea is just to press *6 on your phone. You'll get a newsletter that has updates on the different things that are coming across the Congressman's desk. Congressman, we're going to do
one more thing quick.
Yes, sir.
Sure. One couple of things on this too. I wanted to reference that last question about the Postal Service. I also co-sponsored the Protect Our Post Offices Act, which is going to hopefully help protect our post offices. And as I've contemplated, back to the other question, I think it was Iria that asked about testing. Imagine if we used 30,000 post offices around the country that reach into small towns and through most communities in the country? What if those became testing centers temporarily for our needs as we try to navigate through the pandemic? Using the post office in new ways, those are opportunities. And that's what I want to focus on as a Congress. Let's reimagine how we can do better, more efficiently, more effectively. Just want to make sure to get that in. All right, next question.
Congressman, let's follow up online. Nancy has a question that is in line with your refreshing comments about partisanship. She wants to know, how can we make sure federal dollars for states are allocated fairly and not in a partisan manner?
Well, that's a great question, Nancy. Many of you probably know that Democrats have been fighting for state and local support now for many, many weeks. I meet on, usually during good times, I get together with our mayors regularly over breakfast to listen to what's on everybody's list of priorities and identify ways I can help. More recently, we're doing those, of course, online through teleconferences. And I hear from them all the time about their struggles financially right now, which is affecting every single town, village, city in which we all live. Massive, massive burdens on our cities and our states. And I think most of you on this call probably know that Minnesota ranks 47th out of 50 states in the differential between what we send as taxpayers to the federal government and what we get back in return in both investment and programs. And I won't stand for it anymore. Minnesota has been a donor state to many states that we're subsidizing, and that's been true for decades. And this is a time where the federal government, I do believe, can and should support states that have, through no fault of their own, Minnesota being a great example. We are a well-managed state. We had a budget surplus. We don't spend recklessly. We take better care of people than many states. We're a perfect example of a state that I believe is both deserving and needs support. Now, how we come up with a mechanism that is fair and equitable to all states is something actually we spoke about today on one of our conference calls with some of my Republican colleagues. And that's going to be a challenge, but I do think it's one we can overcome. I also think it is imperative because despite what Mitch McConnell said, states cannot declare bankruptcy. Not to mention, if they did, foreign debt holders around the world would no longer look to the United States as the safest investment in the world. And nothing would be more detrimental to our economy and our future than that. So I do believe the federal government can and should be there, and that is my hope and expectation that we will. In the next CARES Act, I believe that is going to be a line in the sand to ensure that we bring back the money here to Minnesota and to other states that desperately, desperately need it to make it through this terrible crisis.
Anthony in Maple Grove, sit tight for a second. We're going to come to you next, but before we do, we really do want to continue to learn about what's on your mind. So again, on your phone and online, you can give us some feedback. Here's the question, the next question that we would like some insight about how everybody feels. 6 options here, so hang in here with me. But what is your top priority for the next federal coronavirus bill? 1, a plan to reopen our economy. 2, more relief for states, hospitals, families, and small businesses. 3, 2020 election security. 4, oversight. 5, coronavirus testing, and 6, something else. Let me get through these again quickly for you. What's your top priority for the next federal coronavirus bill? 1, a plan to reopen our economy. 2, more relief for states, hospitals, families, and small businesses. 3, 2020 election security. 4, oversight. 5, coronavirus testing, and 6, something else. We do want your feedback on what your top priority is. Okay, Anthony out in Maple Grove, go ahead. You are now live.
Hi, Congressman Phillips. Thanks for taking my question. So I've worked in medical device manufacturing for over 20 years, and throughout that time, I've seen a lot of our best paying jobs moved offshore, in pursuit of greater profits. What that's translated to now during the COVID crisis is lack of access to key, medical support products, PPE that our first responders need, as well as it's raising concerns about even basic medicines like antibiotics, which I've read are exclusively made offshore. So my question is, once we come out of this crisis, do you see legislation coming from Congress to drive the United States back into a position where companies are required to make some significant portion of those, life-saving and life-sustaining products in the United States in order to ensure that we have access in the event of a future crisis.
Mm-hmm. Anthony, great question, and I'm glad you asked it because my Republican colleague, Brian Fitzpatrick, and I just worked on a bill, and that is now introduced, that's called the Made in America Emergency Preparedness Act, designed to do exactly what you just talked about. We have, for far too long, been outsourcing our most important industries and needs overseas. And it's been a big problem. It is one area that I do agree with the president, who has tried to level set our trade relationship with China. Unfortunately, I wish it didn't take this crisis to bring the attention to this issue that we needed, but the answer is yes. We have got to provide incentives and rewards for businesses that choose to manufacture their products in America. What our bill will do is ensure that the items that we need the most, the PPE, the personal protective equipment, the materials that we will need if we ever face another pandemic, are made here, because we cannot rely on the supply chains of our competitors, sometimes our adversaries around the world. So yes, we are going to be very diligent and active and intentional to find ways to inspire a return of that manufacturing base to our country, which of course will create jobs at a time where we're probably going to need it very desperately. So we are working on that. I'm hopeful and I'm optimistic, and that's exactly the kind of thinking that I really appreciate.
Okay, thank you. Let's go next out to Eden Prairie with Tim. Tim, you are now live. Go ahead.
Hello, Dean. I appreciate the evening and the opportunity to get together and talk. When I first posed the question, I thought I would be a very different situation. My question is kind of other than that, Mrs. Lincoln, how did you like the play? With all this horrible stuff, that's going on, what is the light at the end of the tunnel? What is the positive vision? What I'm hearing you talking about this evening, in spite of all this horrible stuff going on, is that there is a lot of positive things. You're able to spend more time talking with your constituents, more time talking with your Democrat and Republican friends, and talk to me about that.
Oh, Tim, thank you for asking that question, because despite the relative darkness right now, I'm optimistic, and I'm seeing extraordinary acts of kindness and generosity and neighbors helping one another, acts of compassion that bring tears to my eyes, and I'm optimistic about not just our country's future, but the entire world. And I know it might be hard to see that sometimes, but I see it when I have to fly back to Washington and I hop on a Delta flight with literally no passengers but myself, plus a flight crew that are working in the most terrible circumstances, risking their own health, but doing so with a smile and a generosity of spirit that would make all of you smile as well. My daughters and I dropped off some locally made masks at 3 fire stations in our district just the other day. And just to spend a few minutes sharing gratitude with our first responders was heartwarming as well. To see young people in our community from Wayzata High School and others to get together and pick up groceries to deliver to people who are isolated or may not be able to go get food for themselves, that warms my heart. This is an opportunity for our country to shine and to do away with the divisions and the mean-spiritedness that seems to have grasped too many people in our country. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, and we will get through this, and we're going to do it together. And I am optimistic. I think there's a new spirit in our Congress. I see people standing up to run for offices now, Democrats and Republicans, who do so out of goodness of their heart and intention to serve their entire community. And I'm optimistic. I think that the best is yet to come. So, Tim, I say keep the faith, and I tell everybody that optimism is just as contagious as fear. And it's up to all of us to share a little bit of that with those in need and come together. And I'll say one more thing. Government can and should do its very best to take care of as many people as it possibly can during a time like this. But the real determinant of how we move forward through this and how we emerge from it will be all of you and how we treat one another, what we do for one another, and perhaps most importantly, how we commit to one another to be better and more compassionate when we get through this. I think this is an opportunity for our country to do some reflection about what kind of nation we want to be. I think it's going to be a good one, and I'm optimistic about the next generation and that all of you on this call will see that light soon. So thank you, Tim.
Congressman, let's go to Brooklyn Park where Nathan has been waiting. Nathan, go ahead. You are now live with the Congressman.
Hi, Dean. Good to talk to you, and I'm not filming you this time.
Oh, my friend Nate. Hello, Nate. Nate, just so everybody knows, Nate had a job to film me as a tracker for Republicans when I was running for office. And despite that starting of an adversarial connection, we became friends. So it's nice to hear your voice, Nate.
Yeah, well, Dean, my question is about opening up, and you touched a little bit on it when you talked about testing earlier. My concern is that Sweden's got a lot of criticism, but I think eventually everywhere is going to end up like Sweden, where we protect our most vulnerable. If you can continue to work from home, you do so. When you go out, you socially distance. But eventually that's where we're all going to end up. And I think there's a lot of misinformation about what testing can accomplish. And primarily that's identifying hotspots and contact tracing where you can, but it's not going to overall prevent people from getting sick. And as soon as we do go back to work, inevitably more people are going to contract this thing. But policy making is about making these important trade-offs. And you can't just say, okay, we can't go back to work until we have 20 million tests a day, because those goals are completely unrealistic. And you can't say, oh, if we even can save one life, everything is worth it, because there has to be some factor of a quality of life and what people are coming back to, because businesses are struggling and some of them might never, ever be the same.
Yeah.
And
Nate,
there has to be a balance on this. So
Nate, I agree. I think so. So Nate is referring to some of you might be following how Sweden has become a little bit of an outlier in how they've approached managing their COVID crisis, and they have not locked down the country. They don't have the stay-at-home orders that many countries, including ours, have in many cases, and they seem to be practicing a strategy of developing herd immunity, so that enough people in their country are exposed to the virus that develop antibodies. And then the disease essentially kind of moves through the population and moves on because it can't find more people to infect. That's their strategy. And look, one reason I love Minnesota is that we often are very similar to Sweden, both our weather, our culture, even our policies. And I think what Nate just proposed is wise. We should look at Sweden's approach. Right now, their cases are much higher than the other Nordic nations, as well as their deaths. There's no question about that. There is no question whatsoever that the way to save the most lives is to do what our governor has done and what most states in our country have done, which is to practice massive social distancing, issue stay-at-home orders, so that we can ensure our health system can meet the need and have the capacity to take care of everybody who gets sick. But there's no question that every country in the world is trying to build the plane as they fly it. And I think it's smart to look around the world for best practices, learn from the countries that seem to do it better than others, and certainly better than we have. And to those of you wondering if our strategy has been a good one, I know it's been painful. I know it's created some economic hardship that's unimaginable just a number of weeks ago. But I do believe, considering the compassion of our country and always our intention to protect as many lives as possible, I do think it has been the right approach. And I'm also concerned that if we relax things too quickly without having a testing mechanism in place, Nate, that will be problematic. Sweden's testing per capita is, my understanding, more significant than ours. We still have some catch up to do, but I think once we're there, I think you're going to see us start relaxing some of those stay-at-home orders, see businesses start opening up, and get this economy back on track as soon as humanly possible. But we'll keep our eyes on that, and I encourage all of you to do it too. Look at other countries. South Korea has done some remarkable work, not just in preventing deaths. They only have 200 and some, I think 244 I mentioned earlier. They're also using technologies in remarkable ways to maintain safety and do tracing, which is another imperative. So we'll keep watching, and I'm glad you brought that up, Nate. Hope you're well.
Thank you, Nate. We're headed out to Chaska. Kathy, you are now live with the Congressman. Please go ahead.
Yes, hi, Dean. My name is Kathy, and I live in Chaska. I work for the U.S. Census Bureau, and I was just calling in to see if you could give a plug so that we could get everybody to fill out their census form. But I do want to say that we did receive an email a couple days ago that said over half the country has already filled out their responses, which is wonderful, because we are not allowed to go out to houses and knock on doors at this time, and I don't know at what point in time that will change. But also just to give a plug for the census, because the census has about 20 surveys going on at all times, and only the one that happens every 10 years is mandatory. Yeah. And it's also the only survey that goes out to everybody in the country. The other surveys are done on a limited basis because, of course, costs would be too high. So anyway, anybody who got their paper in the mail or invitation in the mail can either, there's a number on there, they can call in, they can ask for a mail brochure, or they can go to 2020census.gov.
Well, Kathy, thanks for bringing that up. In fact, I've got good news for everybody. I just tweeted about this yesterday. Minnesota, as you probably all know, in 2018 had the highest voter turnout in the entire nation, and our district, the 3rd district in Minnesota, had the highest turnout out of the 435 districts in the entire country, 73%, I believe it was. The other good news is that we also have the highest volunteer census return rate in the entire nation right now, 64%. And that means Minnesotans have done better than any other state in getting their census forms back. I would argue, citizenship is on the rise in Minnesota. We are focused on civics, and that makes me so thrilled and humbled to be a Minnesotan. So to those of you who've already returned your census forms, hallelujah. Those of you who haven't, I ask that you do so that we can, especially during the pandemic, protect our census workers, because that does complicate matters. And it's important because Minnesota is on the cusp of losing a congressional seat, which none of us want. Our seats in Congress are terribly important to be influential in Washington. And if we don't count everybody in Minnesota, we stand the risk of losing a seat to states that count better than we have. So to all of you, I encourage you to get your forms back in. It's easy. You can do it online. And to the best of your abilities, let's try to be the best state in the country and keep our #1 position.
And again, if you would like to be part of the newsletter from the Congressman, simply hit *6 on your phone. Updates like the census and other matters that are going on that are coming across the Congressman's desk are in those email updates. Again, *6. And Randy in Orono, you are now live with the Congressman. Go ahead with your question.
Congressman Phillips, Randy Rosengren here. I'm looking at your letter dated April 21st to the Secretary of the Department of Treasury and the Small Business Administration. I'm so happy to see that somebody is finally waking up and understanding how poorly the directives are on the PPP program. The 8-week requirement for forgiveness, the 10-day maximum from approval to closing date. It's not a payroll protection program as it's written. It's an obstruction program. And we can't possibly, many businesses, which are mandated to remain closed until Governor Walz permits us to reopen, we can't rehire people. So what's the point of the whole issue? We're throwing money at the problem without any thought at all. And I respect your letter. I agree with it 100%. There's problems with competition, bringing employees back because they're making more unemployed than they are when they were employed. And these are highly paid people when they were employed. But due to the $600 bonus, many of them just really, frankly, don't want to return to work until they've exhausted that. So I want to first thank you for that. And how can we bring more attention to this problem? Because it's just a lot of money being spent with good intentions and poor direction.
Randy, thank you for both your comments and your concerns, and I share them. As a small business owner, I recognized very early on how some of the rule setting by the Treasury Department and Small Business Administration were actually working against the very small businesses that we had intended to support. For those of you who are not familiar with the letter that I wrote that Randy just referred to, I sent a letter to Secretary Mnuchin and the Treasury Department asking that they modify some rules, including the 8-week window that businesses can actually use these dollars. We believe that should be extended. And then there's a 75-25 rule, meaning that 75% of the PPP loan, the Paycheck Protection Program loan, has to be used for payroll, and only 25% can be used for other needs. But anybody who's a small business owner knows that some small businesses are very labor intensive, others less so. And I believe that businesses need more flexibility right now, not less. I also testified just 3 days ago or so in front of the Small Business Committee when I was in Washington. I put that video online and anybody can watch it. And I spoke to the same issues that we have to address to ensure that the program works for all the small businesses in our country. And as you said, Randy, it was a program that I think was designed with good intentions, a great collaboration of Democrats and Republicans, and we have to modify it. We look at what's working, what's not. I talk to small business owners every day for a good part of the day, and when I hear the same complaint over and over again, that's all I need to act. And I think we're moving the needle. And if we can't get the Treasury Department to make the change themselves, in the next CARES Act, I'm proposing that we include legislative fixes to ensure that we provide the flexibility to all of the small businesses that need it. I should also say we must ensure that every small business can access these loans, because I'm hearing from far too many that seem to be put at the bottom of the list. Larger businesses got support quickly. Some couldn't get it at all. Some challenged to get the EIDL loans, the EIDL loans from the Small Business Administration. Many people not hearing back from them. And we got to do better. And we got to hold the Small Business Administration accountable. The good news for Minnesota is in the first PPP program, Paycheck Protection Program, 46,000 Minnesota businesses received loans. $9 billion was distributed. We were among the highest in the entire country for the number of loans and distribution of dollars. In no small part because we've got a wonderful community banking system in Minnesota with wonderful bankers, passionate about their communities, connected to the businesses in their communities. And we did it better than a lot of states did, but we have to improve it. And I'm going to continue to work my tail off to ensure that we do.
Congressman, let's go back to Maple Grove, where Joy Ann has been waiting. Joy, you are now live. Please go ahead with your question.
Hello, Congressman. I appreciate your thoughtfulness and your diligence in really researching things so that you do have the facts. My concern comes from a comment that actually an order from the president today that meatpacking plants would have to reopen. Well, I come from an agricultural community, and I know that the Tyson plant in Waterloo was never closed by the company or the governor, but that in fact there were so few employees showing up for work because they had 200 employees sick with coronavirus and the plant wasn't closing. So if those plants have to reopen, what are the protections that are going to be in place for those workers?
Oh, Joanne, I have to tell you, when I just heard the president issue that this afternoon, my heart sank because I was just on the phone with our Republican and Democratic colleagues with Governor Wallace today. We were talking about how horrific the plant closures have been. Many of you know that JBS, I think in Worthington, is now closed. Minnesota is now going to have to start slaughtering over, I think, 100,000 hogs a day because these plants are closed. 1.5 million turkeys are going to be have to be killed, and we're dumping milk. And this is despite starving people all around our country right now, and it just breaks my heart. As for the meat plants, though, the issue, this did not require a presidential order to stay open. The issue here is not the businesses wanting to stay open. The issue here is that the employees of these plants have contracted COVID, and they work in close quarters and have been transmitting the disease to one another, and they cannot, to your point, they cannot get enough people to work, and it is not appropriate to put others in a position where they're likely to get sick and some people die. And this goes back to the testing issue, my friends. We have got to be in a position where we can test people at big plants and manufacturing facilities to ensure that people who work there can be safe. And right now they're not. So this is not something that I would argue is appropriate or even reasonable for the president to decree, if you will. This is all about people being sick. And the better that our governors do to protect people, the more likely the plants will stay open. But we're going to be facing a challenge soon. If too many big plants close, it's going to affect our food supplies, and that is not acceptable to me. So this goes back to testing, and that's what we have to do, because there has got to be a thoughtful intersection between safety and speed as we reopen. But food plants are essential. Many of them, most of them in our country, are up and running and producing food every day, but these meat plants have been struck, especially in our part of the country, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, and it's very problematic. Colin Peterson, our congressman, who is the chairman of the Ag Committee, a very important role, is working diligently right now with our governor and others to ensure that we do the very best we can to keep these plants open, and if they're closed, make sure that they can reopen as soon as possible. But as for the president's action, I'm sorry to say it was, I think, very misguided and unfortunate.
Okay, everybody, listen, if you would like to sign up for the newsletter, again, it's *6 on your phone. Simply also, if you have a question, you can go *3 on your phone. Congressman, let's go to Eden Prairie, where Mark has been waiting. Mark, you're now live. Thank you for your patience.
Hi there, Congressman. Mine is kind of a follow-up question because you've answered a portion of it earlier, and that is the unfairness or the disproportionate amount of money that is paid by Minnesotans in particular, but a lot of the blue states in comparison to the federal government into what some of the more southern states are paying, South Carolina in particular. And you mentioned something about the CARES Act, that there would be something in there, but I'm wondering if there's anything we could do about making it so that the percentage is paid equally over the possibility that the population, but just the idea of each state paying a fair amount, a equal amount in percentage-wise for the expenses of the federal government, and the rest of us don't have to carry the other states. And what could be done in the future, not just with in the near future.
Mark, thank you for your question. That's something I'm giving a great deal of thought to right now, along with my colleagues, is how do we provide support in an equitable fashion, not reward states that are poorly managed, and frankly, start rewarding states that are well managed, like Minnesota is. The reason that we get so much less in federal support is we do better. We take better care of people. Our health systems are more efficient, which means our Medicare reimbursements, our Medicaid tend to be less. We don't tend to attract big federal projects. Some of the only big federal dollar projects we get are transportation projects. And I'm really intent on changing that dynamic. I meet with my colleagues all the time, reminding them of our collective responsibility to advocate for Minnesota. We've got to set our Minnesota nice, and I'm afraid get a little bit more aggressive. And as you you'll often see a pattern between where the leaders in Congress come from and how enriched their states are. You can look at many states in that respect, Kentucky being just one of them right now because, of course, Mitch McConnell has been in a little bit of a tit for tat with Governor Cuomo in New York. And Governor Cuomo's response is, we've been subsidizing you for decades. I don't want to see another national fight between states. What I want to do is see a more equitable distribution of federal dollars, and when it comes to support, to find a way to really provide equity, meaning that it should be based on need, the same way that I want to see the PPP program and our other distribution programs during the relief phase, be predicated on need. So we're not enriching the people who need it the least at the expense of the people or states who need it the most. So I take your question to heart. I promise you we'll be doing a lot of work on that. It will not be an easy formula ultimately, but it is one that we have to pay great attention to. And I'm intent, like I said, on ensuring that Minnesota is no longer punished for being a more efficient and better run state than a lot of those that we happen to support. So I want you all to know that, because we should be holding all of our elected officials in Washington accountable for that, myself included, to make this a priority and to ensure that all of your tax dollars are used very effectively. So thank you.
Congressman, let's go to Plymouth, where Karen has been waiting. Karen, you are now live with the Congressman. Please go ahead with your question.
Thank you, Dean Phillips, for your time this evening. My question and my concerns, I am a retired nurse, and I still have friends that are in the profession and working on the front lines with COVID patients. Some of them in long-term care. My concern is that these people in long-term care, which seems to be a very high rate of positive virus, that in our state, that they get the equipment they need. And also, with these nurses that are working these long shifts, I have a concern that when this gets over with, that there will be possibly some post-traumatic stress situations. And how would that be addressed? And coming from a farming community, raised on a farm in southwestern Minnesota, with people like previously was talking about, of dumping milk, of crops that are being destroyed. Can there be some kind of logistics to get these crops to food shelves or wherever they're needed?
Well, Karen, first let me thank you for your wonderful service as a nurse. I know you said you're retired, I think, but thank you. And to all of your brothers and sisters who are currently serving in hospitals all around the country under such horrifying conditions, my heart goes out to you and all of your friends about whom you speak. Their work, they really are the soldiers in this war, and I just can't thank them enough, as I know everybody on this call wants to do as well. And with that said, we spend $740 billion a year to ensure that our military is well equipped for the demands of their job. The fact that our frontline healthcare workers and caregivers in facilities in Minnesota and throughout the country are having to reuse their PPE, their personal protective equipment, cannot get N95 masks, don't have the material necessary to do their jobs with safety, is just abhorrent and inexcusable. And as I've referenced before in this call, our country was not prepared, and the administration, whether they wish to admit it or not, unfortunately, has got to be accountable, because that is the job of the executive branch of the United States of America, to ensure that our federal stockpile is not just adequate, but is distributed when needed. And unfortunately, our stockpile was poorly maintained. Much of the material in it was well beyond its useful life. And as a result, states are literally fighting each other and bidding up the price of the most simple equipment needed to protect our frontline healthcare workers. And I'm appalled. and I'm not going to lie to all of you. I'm horrified, and we got to do a better job. So to all of those who are suffering because of the lack of PPE, we are doing work every day to help our states do what is the job of the federal government, which is to ensure supplies are available and source it. And that's unfortunately, where we stand right now. And I'm sorry to say, but we're going to try to make sure that that never happens again, which is one reason the bill I referenced about the Bring Manufacturing Back to America Act, we're going to ensure that this kind of material and equipment is made in the United States so we do not have to rely on other nations to take care of us. Because I grew up in an America in which we helped other countries because we were the strong ones, we were the prepared ones, we were the well-organized ones, and we were in a position to help others. And I'm afraid now we're having to ask others for help, and it's not the kind of America that I want to be. I think we are better than that. We will be better than that, and we owe it to all of our nurses and doctors and healthcare staff to do so.
Congressman, we're going to out to Maple Plain where Jim's waiting. Jim, go ahead with your question, please.
Yes, my question is, how are we going to make sure that this mail-in voting that you want to pass is going to be legitimate? Past elections, we've had dead people voting. We've got congressmen from other districts or other states saying, they want to let illegal immigrants who have no legal right to vote. How do you keep all that from happening with a mail-in process when they can't keep it when you got to show an ID right now?
Well, Jim, how do we do it? We look to states. Well, take the state of Utah, one of the most conservative states in the entire country, a state that voted for Donald Trump, of course, a state that has almost exclusively Republicans representing them in Washington. Utah uses only mail-in balloting, only. And they've been doing so for some time. They've worked out the kinks. They know how to manage it. Every single study done indicates that the incidence of fraud is almost non-existent. Every state in the country has some form right now of mail balloting. And the answer to your question is we do. We look at best practices, others who are already doing it, and we employ those. I don't want to see anybody vote who isn't legally allowed to vote. I don't want to see someone who's not an American citizen cast a vote in our elections. And all the evidence indicates that every state, for every election that we've had mail voting, that is not a problem. And until someone can show me evidence to the contrary, I'm going to work under the premise that it is a thoughtful way to do things. I'm sure many of you on this call have used mail balloting, including the President of the United States, who voted via mail in the recent primary election in Florida. I say if it's good enough for the President, it's probably good enough for every single eligible American voter, and especially in the middle of a pandemic when I don't want one American to not cast a ballot in this election because he or she was afraid to catch COVID-19. And I hope most of you will agree with that. I want to make sure our election is secure. I want to make sure that only those who legally can vote do so. And I want to make sure it's safe. If we can all agree on that, we can definitely debate the tactics and logistics. But like I said earlier, Colorado, Utah, Washington, Oregon, Hawaii, and they use only mail ballots, and every other state in the country is increasingly using early voting and mail balloting for elections. It's a thoughtful, secure way. And it also, most importantly, provides a paper trail, which I think is something that every one of us finds important as well. So that's how I think we should do it. And I'm always open to hearing from all of you if you have some ideas on how to make sure it works well for everybody.
Congressman, let's sneak in a couple more. Out to Bloomington, where Stephen has been waiting. Stephen, please go ahead. You're now live.
Hi, Mr. Congressman. First of all, I want to thank you for all your hours and bipartisan efforts ever since you took office, and it's very commendable.
Thank you.
my concern, I have owned a business 25 years, a very small manufacturing business. At one point, we did have a few employees, and then as I got older, I helped some of the others get jobs even in the same field, and now I run the business myself. I'm 70 years old. And I was extremely excited when I first read the EIDL legislation or package, and I know there was not anything in there about $1,000 per employee being the maximum. I think that the limit at that time was $10,000. The language was a bit ambiguous, saying that you could get up to $10,000, but I think at the time that meant that if you needed more than $10,000, you needed to apply for a loan. But now I submitted my application on March 27th, long before anyone talked about the program running out of money. And about 2 weeks after I sent in my application, that bold lettering was added and sent to all applicants saying that since the program was getting tight, more or less, that we would be restricted to $1,000 per employee. And that just devastates so many people, myself included. That $10,000 would have got a long way for me without employees. And I guess the other part, Mr. Congressman, is that the other companies, the large companies, they got their own PPL program with trillions of dollars. And I just don't understand why the SBA comes back and takes it away from the mom and pop shops.
Steve, I hear you. Yeah, let me add one more thing to the last question I answered about mail balloting. I just want to let everybody know, too, Jim's question, I believe it was, and that just if people aren't aware that there are many, many rural towns in Minnesota, many communities that right now have only mail balloting. Eligible voters are mailed a ballot. They return them. We've been doing it for years. It works very well. So even in our own state, we have examples of mail-only balloting. It works well without fraud, and we can learn even from our own best practices. Steve, as to your question and challenge, I'm so sorry to hear it, and I'm on the phone with many in your position with the same complaint. That's why I sent my letter to Secretary Mnuchin and Treasury to try to change that very issue, because the promise was $10,000, and of course it was changed. The rationale was that they felt that first of all, so everybody knows, the EIDL loans are economic injury disaster loans issued by the Small Business Administration. The rationale was they felt more businesses would get money that way. But as you just so eloquently stated, Stephen, that is not how it's working out for people. That is why I'm trying to effect a rules change in the SBA through my correspondence with the Secretary. Others feel exactly the same way, so we're going to try to do so. I know time matters, every day matters, every hour matters. I wish that is something that would have been done already, but we're going to keep pushing. And like I said, if worse comes to worse, we're going to try to address that in the next legislative bill to force the Treasury Department to make that change, because I believe they changed the rule, frankly, after the game had already started, and that's not the way I think we should be doing business. So I hear you. I'm sorry, and I'm going to keep going to bat for you, I promise.
Congressman, can we get one more in?
Yeah, let's do one more. Absolutely.
Okay. We're going to go back to Plymouth. Rob, you've been waiting. Rob, please go ahead. You're now live.
Yes, thank you. And first, Representative, thank you so much for just offering this platform. This is really making government accessible, and it's just wonderful to have this opportunity.
Thank you.
So, two questions, and to keep them fairly brief, I know we're at the end of the conversation here. One is, I'm in a position here and working with the state of Minnesota and assisting in response to COVID-19. I'm wondering what ways can we help, not just here at the state level, but throughout the United States, small businesses in response to the effort. And then my next question I'm sorry, my next question is in regards to mental health. What can we do to help with the mental health? We have a lot of people that are cooped up in homes, and it seems as though that's an issue that we could address.
Thank you, Rob. First, thanks for your kind words. As for small businesses can do a lot to help right now. In fact, I'm receiving calls almost every day from businesses that have products they make that could be used by hospitals or nurses or caregivers. Many small businesses are sharing some of their resources with those in need in their communities. Depending on what kind of business you have, I think there are some remarkable and wonderful ways to help. And rather than me expressing what to do, I encourage all of you to let me know what you are doing so that I can spread the word and celebrate your good work, because it's going to be a very different economy when we emerge from this. Consumers' habits are going to change. Some businesses will succeed because of it. Others are going to struggle immensely because of it, especially, I would argue, small restaurants and cafes and the like. So we're going to have to look out for one another and support one another, and I'm eager to hear how all of you are doing so. As for mental health, some of you may have read a tragic story just yesterday that a very senior female physician who had been on the front lines at a hospital in New York that unfortunately had about 50 COVID-19 fatalities, went to take a weekend away with her parents and ended her life by suicide because of the stress of the job and what she's seeing. And we're going to have a whole country filled with extraordinary, selfless caregivers, nurses, doctors, and staff who are going to see horrors that they never imagined possible. And we're going to have to be there for them. Suicide is up on farms as the farm economy is suffering. Suicide is up amongst veterans and members of our armed services. We have an epidemic right now alongside COVID-19, and that's an epidemic of suicide and despair, which is being exacerbated because of the isolation that's required during these difficult days. And that's something that I am working on as well with a number of my colleagues, both in the Senate and the House, on support for mental health. I want to start younger. I want to make sure that young children in our elementary schools have access to mental health support at an age where it can make such a huge difference, especially for kids who have suffered trauma. And we have to destigmatize emotional health and mental health, because everybody suffers from challenges in their lifetimes. None of us are immune from it. And once we fulfill the great dream of Paul Wellstone, and of course one of my predecessors, Jim Ramstad, worked so well on it too, which is mental health parity with physical health. We're a country that should express that compassion, especially to the people that literally keep us alive every single day, who are going through such extraordinary trauma right now. So thank you for elevating that and reminding us all to not just look out for one another, but to ensure that our emotional and mental health is taken care of just like our physical health. So with that,
Congressman, before... Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
I was just going to say we're going to finish up tonight with some contact information and some of the some of the ways that they can get a hold of you. But before we do, your closing remarks, sir.
Thank you. I want to thank you all so much. My only disappointment is that I'm not on a stage and all of you in front of me, because my great joy is appearing in front of all you. And once we get through these difficult days, we will start redoing our town halls, which I do regularly. It's one of the highlights of my service, and I look forward to seeing all of you. And so grateful that you would take the time on the phone tonight and ask your questions and share perspectives and ideas. So thank you. And our community is a remarkable one, and I'm so thrilled and honored and frankly humbled to represent you. But we got a lot of work ahead, and my promise to you is that I'm going to continue to listen. I will continue to learn. I will advocate for you no matter what your politics. My great joy is to visit and spend time with and learn and respect people who have different perspectives than I do. My father used to tell me as a kid, if two people always agree, you only need one of them. And I believe in that. And I ask you to challenge me, and I ask you to share your criticisms, because it makes me a better representative for everybody. And I told you all I'm a small business owner and a dad, and I'm a son, and I'm your representative in Congress. And I know how devastating some of the impacts of this pandemic are for so many of you. Whether it's Moni's Bar in Maple Plain that I just spoke about in the Small Business Committee, or Maynard's on Lake Minnetonka, small businesses, in this case restaurants that are wonderful. I just want you to know that I'm going to do my very, very best to protect our workers and our small business owners and families. You are my highest priority as we first provide relief and then recovery as we emerge from this terrible, terrible crisis. So in the coming days, I'm going to be introducing more legislation that I hope will provide opportunities for a whole-of-government response to the pandemic. We'll continue to work with my Democratic and Republican colleagues on the Problem Solvers Caucus and stay connected to our local leaders. The Problem Solvers Caucus just released a back-to-work plan for America that I think is both actionable, reasonable, and probably the best benchmark and template we have to get our economy back open again soon. So I love you all. I ask you to keep in touch and most importantly, keep the faith, because we're going to get through this. And like I said earlier, optimism is just as contagious as fear, and I'm here for you all the time, anytime. My wonderful staff and I are here to serve you. So God bless you, Godspeed, be in touch, and keep the faith. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Congressman. And for everybody listening, good time to grab a pen and some paper as we say goodbye. We do want to acknowledge that we are coming to the end of our event this evening. And also on behalf of the Congressman, we really do appreciate you taking the time to join our Dial-In with Dean. We appreciate the opportunity as well to speak directly with you and to answer all of your great questions tonight. If we were not able to get to any of your questions this evening, you can leave a voicemail after this event. And you can also send us an email by going to phillips.house.gov. You can also call our Minnetonka office at 952-656-5176. Let me give that to you again, 952-656-5176. You can also reach us in our D.C. office at 202-225-2871. Again, 202-225-2871. And hey, also on social media, that's where the most up-to-date information is, and you can follow us on Twitter and Facebook at Rep. Dean Phillips. We're going to host more of these events in the future to keep you informed in what we're working on and other important updates. Thank you, everybody, again, and have a good night.